Welcome back, everybody. We're back here. We're gonna cover the shape high six. If I could talk,
Get it right now, Stu. Get it right. Shape shorts.
shape shorts. We're gonna cover those. We'll just give you a quick thing, and then we're gonna go into some details on 1 and 2.
Right, and the first thing is that at any point we're going to talk about 2 of the 6. The first 2 of the 6, and the 6 that we talked about last time were to animate,
To originate,
and to rejuvenate,
to stimulate,
to demonstrate Deus Ex Machina,
and finally to tell the story.
and I think what we really wanted to do is to present 1 and 2, to animate and to originate in a little more detail what we did in the short 50 minutes that we have. I should warn the audience, though, when Stu Barr is talking, feel free to get a snack or leave the room if you want. He'll have a tendency to go on, and if he does, by the way, if you do fall asleep, that's normal. It was very common in his classes that would happen.
Some people project. We won't go there.
Well, I can tell you a personal experience. Stu Barr was a
Projection,
student.
projection.
Well, let's start.
Okay.
The idea. To animate was one of the first things we talked about when we got together and discussed what we did for the 70 years of collective teaching. That we did a lot of animating, but animating not in the sense of becoming the character we're talking about. We became the idea of the character that we were dealing with in humanities and philosophy, whether it was Plato or Socrates or Hume or Berkeley. It didn't matter. We made the idea come to life. So animation is really bringing to life and making somewhat energizing the student to realize that these are not just characters you hear names. They have personalities, they have desires, they had faults, and they had made mistakes. And so we would bring that forward for animation.
And I know on some of the animation, I'd have students, I'd say something in class, and someone would say, well, you said last class. And I'd say, no, I didn't say it. We were reading Goethe's Faust. He said it.
Exactly.
I didn't say it. You don't really know what I said because I'm not famous enough to be in any of the books here.
Well, I think our comment we used to say was that if we did our job correctly, a student would always ask us, are you X, are you Y,
Correct.
are you from this political party, that political party? And we used to say, if we do our job right, at the end of the class, you will not know who we are.
Yeah, and I don't want you to.
And it's really not part of the content. The content is to bring wonderful, remarkable ideas that brought us to where we are today. That's a living thing. That's not something that goes away. It's something that we progress forward with, and that's what animation is really all about. And I think a lot of professors do that, and I'm sad to say that probably some don't. And they present it in a way that's very, skeletal in the form of without the actual flesh on the system.
Well, I always noticed, you were my teacher once, and you were very animate.
Yeah.
Animate, I don't know. I wasn't sure how animation worked when I first watched you. And then I used to talk to your physics students. They said you animate all right.
Well,
I don't know what that meant. But...
Well, I think we should get off that topic as soon as possible. That would be most likely for a different topic in a different episode on a different channel, I think. But Originate was what you had presented when we talked about this, because you had a lot of more original sources. For physics to have original sources was tough.
Yeah, I would do Originate. One of the things I would do under Originate means I would take them, how does the idea work for you? An example of this. The first word in the Iliad Greek is anger. But why is it anger? What is the story of anger? How is Achilles motivated by the anger? And I'd go to the students. You ever felt angry? You ever felt that rage? It's almost addicting. You feel it's not necessarily good, but there isn't really much of a drug better than a real rage. You get to feel this. And so I'd animate and I'd go around and ask them, have you ever felt that? How did it make you feel? But in the end, like any drug, how destructive is it in the long run? What did it do? Why am I talking to you about a psychological condition 3,000 years old? Another example I would use, in the introduction to the Divine Comedy, when Dante finds himself walking in a dark wood at the midpoint in his life, for he had lost the one true way. Well, wait a minute, what does that symbolize? How many of you, I would say to students, you're in your 20s, how many of you are going to reach some point in your life, 40s, where you realize you got more memories than future, and you start to ask yourself, what have I done? Are you now in that dark wood with Dante? This is, when I say an original idea, these ideas aren't old. Every human being feels this, grabs onto it at some point.
Yeah, many of your students, if you retain that at age 12, is what I heard. So it's
Yeah, it's my
possible
advanced age.
you really know more about this.
Well,
than
maybe I'm an
even
old
Dante.
soul.
It could very well be. But you brought a good point. The point about being old and modern, the idea that modernity is not created yesterday and it's not created today. Mm-hmm. It's a remnant, and a remnant in the best possible way. Mm-hmm. That is a step forward. Mm-hmm. And that step forward cannot occur without a step having occurred before. And the idea that old and modern are distinct is really a mistake. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we talked about earlier too is to originate. When I taught physics, I would always bring up certain things about, I'd say maybe a phrase, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Well, Newton didn't say that. If he said it, then it would mean that if I were to throw an object forward, I would have to be thrown backward the same way. And that's not what happens. So that what he says is for every action on one object, there is an equal and opposite reaction on the second object. And when you bring that out in Latin to the students, I would bring the book in and I'd read off the Latin version and the translation, and then you start realizing it is not a quip. It's not a 2-second response. Mm-hmm. It has a lot of content. And you did the same with the Iliad and so on.
And one of the things you do with this, and when I put these together, we're kind of going back and forth between Animate and Originate. But the Animate comes into there when I said the thing about the Iliad, and when I said the thing about the Divine Comedy. When you bring up Goethe's Faust, think of this animated. How many people, as Dante brings out in the Divine Comedy, but what is Faust? Middle-aged college professor who's done everything and he's bored. Mm-hmm. Nothing left for you. How many people, we give it a modern name, we call it a midlife crisis or some other thing. There's nothing modern about this. This is a nature. And he finds nothing of value, nothing of entertainment. There's nothing left in his life. How many people have played games with buying stuff, buying the biggest boat, the biggest car, the biggest stuff when they earn tons? What are they really? Are they any different than Faust sitting in his office with the trash of generations, as he says, scattered before him, and meaningless? The Animate comes bringing that up to them. One of the ways I used to animate that, by the way, I made my office at school look like a Faustian office.
Still does. I think your whole house looks that way.
It does look like that. Yeah. A friend of mine called it a mausoleum. But
yeah, no kidding. I don't think Halloween's almost every day at your house.
Well, yeah.
I think.
The kids don't come by.
No, not
I get
at all.
to keep the candy.
They run. They scream. But to really to carry on with that conversation about Animate, to originate, bring up the idea of modern concepts. Like one that's popular now are the skull phones that people would put on. Rather than putting an earphone in, you put a pad around your jaw and get sound through your jaw. Well, that's something that Beethoven did. And with a pencil, because he did have difficulty hearing, and was that deaf, and used a pencil on his teeth, and would put the pencil to the keyboard of the piano and play, and he'd hear it through his skull. So this is something from the 18th century that now is brought forward as a new technology. It's not a new technology; it's a revolutionary technology, which doesn't have that tendency to put history to it. It's revolutionary.
What Tony just brought up is an excellent example of how you merge the humanities and the sciences. Mm-hmm. He and I are both talking about the same thing. We're looking at stuff from the past, seeing how they originate. So you talk about Beethoven, you talk about the modern earphones, or you talk about the stuff I did with this. These subjects aren't differentiated at all. They merge into one entity. And when the student sees that student starts to find an interest. There's been a big thing in education. How do you make it relevant to the student? I always wondered, I don't really understand, what do I make it relevant? This is humanity. This is people. Right. What you brought up, what I brought up with the literature.
Relevancy is kind of a byproduct that is it's what it's all about.
It's all relevant.
It's all relevant in that sense. And when you bring it to life, then it becomes something to the students. And I've seen this in the students' eyes.
Yeah.
I think we both have.
Sure,
often,
exactly.
I could often remember you and I both would go overtime in class.
Yeah.
And I was always impressed that the students would stay. Well, I was also impressed they stayed in your class. That was amazing to me because, Stu Bar, I want to get out of the class.
Well, you're a scientist. You wouldn't understand.
Yeah, well, anyway. But the point was they would stay. And how often did your students come in your office or in my office? It was flooded with students just hang around, just to talk and to get more of what it was. And these were not necessarily physics students; they were philosophy students as well. I had the honor of teaching philosophy and humanities for almost 30 years. Yeah. And it was remarkable to see what impact it has just to make a little tiny story, or in this context, not a story, but a historical clip, and bring it to the modern perspective. And they wanted more.
I used to see, and it's true, I would watch them. One of the things I found with these two, when the student becomes engaged, and how do I know they're engaged? They start asking me questions that show some understanding or an attempt to understand it. That encouragement was absolutely phenomenal to me. As a teacher, there was nothing more rewarding than when a student came in, if I could speak, and said, well, you did this and this. Why is it that way? Why did you do that way? Sometimes, some of them were shocked. I
should warn the audience that you do have a mute button on your system. I would actually use that, at least have it in remote format so that when Stu Bar starts talking, mute.
Well, I would warn you too. Some administrators may not be happy with a stunt like this. But one thing I did learn from them, regardless of their religious inclination, they thought. And I never told them they were wrong. I'm not going to tell them that they shouldn't do it. They thought. And watching a student think is just, it's one of the most rewarding things you can get.
It gets you going for the next class. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And every morning you wake up with a new idea in mind that way, something that you thought of. But I think we kind of covered a lot about that today, Stu. Maybe next time we ought to pick up the next two, which is to rejuvenate and
to stimulate.
Yeah, and that's what we'll talk about next time.
Yeah.
I think it would be to elaborate more on the ideas. And again, these are not separate.
No.
We're separating only because we want to talk about them in more detail over 15 minutes.
The rejuvenate, for example. I've often wondered how many little kids, before they ever enter school, ask questions. Tons of questions. Well, we want to rejuvenate and bring that curiosity back.
Bring that brain back to where it was.
Well,
so it's rebooting away.
Yeah.
And basically the same with the stimulate is to make that student a active learner, not a passive one. Yeah. That's really the key for A students. That's what we're going to do next time.
Yeah.
And if they decide to come back, they
if they did, who knows? But one of the things a student will get out of this, and I've always been, the creativity when they start to put this together and they start to form their own ideas. It sounds bizarre, but it's just like the 5 or 6 year old forms their own idea. However bizarre they may be, that's an active brain. And why do we want them to do that?
And you do bring a good point in to close today, and that is Shape Shifters, SHAPE, is really designed, well, we thought of it because we wanted to build back creativity at all levels. And we talked about it in essence that in science, without humanities, may have lost that creativity. And humanity without science may have also lost that kind of creativity.
Well, science, or humanities without the sciences and the math, has lost the discipline that's necessary.
Right.
And it reminds me, an artist has to be a good craftsman, but a good craftsman is not necessarily an artist.
Right. And science itself is not the analytic study as we think it is. When we talk about, which will come up in the next few episodes, that most scientists had a tremendous background in languages, in philosophy, they had to, and humanities, in literature, art. It was part of their being, it was part of their DNA. Well, we want to bring that in again.
Well, we want to thank everybody for listening to poor Tony again.
Well, I'm really sorry. I apologize in advance for Stuart Barr. We'll try to calm him down a little bit and get into a point where it's respectable, and hope to see you on our next Shape Shorts.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.